Second part. Even after Dee had backed away, no cheer went up in the control room. And what they just witnessed was so incredible it left them absolutely stunned with amazement. And their amazement, along with their overwhelming sense of relief, was enough to throw them into a state of dementia. The man before them, their savior, clearly couldn't be human. And that's why he was so good-looking. Lightly tossing his head, Dee shook off the white smoke still rising from his body. "The flying object is closing," a somewhat listless voice announced through the microphone, and the main craft still remained. Braced, perhaps, for the next attack, Dee didn't move.
"It's closing on us. Just 1,000 yards off. 900. 700. 600. It's gonna hit us. We can't change our heading. We've had it now."
A black wind fluttered by the men. Dee exited the control room. Racing up the stairs, he charged across the street. The center of town was completely empty. With sunlight falling in a bright shower, the town was a picture of tranquility. A voice he knew cried out, and Dee looked over his shoulder. Laurie and Dr. Tsurugi were dashing toward him. Dee didn't stop for them, but kept on running. Something became visible beyond the town's defensive walls. The form of their foe was clear now. It seemed that floating cities of various kinds followed the same basic structure, and the shape flying toward them at high speed bore strong resemblance to their own town. In fact, it was almost identical. The familiar rows of dwellings, the navigational control tower, and three-dimensional radar arrays all stood out in the sunlight. Perhaps the only point where the two towns differed was that all of the structures on the other town were reinforced with menacing armor plating. One look at the new town, and its aim was apparent. The vessel was built to plunder. Posing as an ordinary city, they might close in on their victims under a pretext of trade, then use their cannons to rob their prey of their defenses before sending armed troops to board. In other words, they were pirates of the sky. But, strangely enough, not only wasn't there a single person to be seen on the streets or in any of the ship's portholes, but no one was visible through the control room's window either.
"That's odd. If this ship's here to loot us, they should be softening us up with their guns now,"
Dee heard the winded Dr. Tsurugi say from behind him.
"But they're pulling alongside us instead. We'll have to fight them."
"What about the sheriff?" Dee asked, eyeing the pirate ship slowly circling them.
"He'll be here soon enough, I'm sure,"
the physician replied.
"The real question is whether he'll be of any use or not."
"Why's that?"
"As you may already know, due to their overprotected state, people around here are incredibly susceptible to shock. The townsfolk here have had peace for too long. Fights and other disputes have always been the sort of things they could settle among themselves in their little town. Forget the fact they wouldn't know how to begin to deal with attackers from outside. The whole incident with the lightning has left a lot of them in a stupor."
"Then it's up to just the three of us." A perplexed expression wafted over Dr. Tsurugi's face.
"The three of us,"
he muttered, paling instantly.
"I can't believe you. You intend to have Laurie fight. Why, she's just—"
"She has to live on her own." Dee's words had an edge like the wind. After a bit of hemming and hawing, Dr. Tsurugi nodded.
"You're right. That's what life on the frontier is all about. But what'll we do?"
A sharp impact shook the ground they stood on. The enemy ship had finally pulled alongside the town. Dee produced a memo pad from one of his coat's inner pockets. It was the same pad that had been left out for Lori at the hospital. Eyes wide with astonishment, the physician wondered why he'd been carrying it around. Putting the tip of his forefinger in his mouth and nicking it open, Dee drew it across the memo pad. "Fight or die," he wrote. "We want you with us." Us. That meant the three of them were going to fight together. Lori nodded fervently. "But what do you have her do? She's an injured girl." "Go to the weapons bunker and get us some arms. She'll carry the ammo and be in charge of reloading." "Okay." The two of them dashed away. Dee looked back at the blocks of buildings. As his companions' footsteps faded out, more rough footfalls arose to take their place. It was the mayor, the sheriff, and some of his men. 4 men in all. And the physician had said he didn't know if they'd be of any use. There was another impact against their protective walls. From the deck of the pirate ship, several steel sheets extended toward the town. Hooks sank noisily into the top of the town's walls, and the sheriff and his companions unconsciously backed away. Every face was taut with fear. These men lived in a closed society where everyone understood just how tough they were supposed to be. But now that they faced invaders who wouldn't know the reputations they'd long relied on, they were reduced to cowards. Dee's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He waited, but what he waited for never appeared. Silence. Nothing happened. While the planks had been laid for plundering, not a single blood-crazed outlaw appeared. "What the hell is this, then?" one of the lawmen said, sounding rather relieved. "Are they just screwing with us, or what? Not one of them has shown himself." "They'll come out any second," another one said, his voice on the verge of tears. "And when they do, they'll rip us to shreds with some god-awful weapons. Damn it. Damn it all. Why do we gotta go up against these damn freaks?" The sheriff roared, "Knock it off! You're turning my belly. We're here now, so there's no use whining about it. We ain't letting a single one of them marauding mother humpas into town." Compared to his compatriots, Hudden was certainly brave. In the wake of that outburst, his cowardly deputies readied their shotguns again. And yet, still, nothing happened. The mayor looked at Dee suspiciously. "Somehow, I don't think they're toying with us." No reply came from the hunter, but his black coat zipped past the men's noses. Dee stood on the gangway bridging the two vessels. Black hair streaming in the wind, coat fluttering, he trained his jelled gaze on the deck of the enemy ship. Suddenly, he advanced without making a sound. The men looked at each other. They must have realized protecting the town was an unavoidable part of their duty. But the mayor stayed where he was, led by the sheriff, while the others struggled up the wall and began to cross the same gangway. Just as they finished crossing the 10-foot-long plank, 2 things made the men grow pale: a strange aura and a stench. The aura could only mean death, and the stench was that of death as well. Just moments earlier, this ominous vessel had been fearing for their very lives, but now the unsettling silence did even more to start these rough men shaking. There was no sign of Dee. The men hopped down onto the street. Right in front of them lay the residential sector. The layout itself wasn't all that different from their own town. Pete, you, and Yan, find the control room. I'm gonna check out this area. But Sheriff, this place gives me the creeps. You damn fool. The way things are going, there's probably nobody on this tub. Maybe they took to killing each other or some kind of epidemic broke out, but for all we know, everyone could be dead. Now think for a second what that'd mean. Pete's face, sullen until now, suddenly shone. Oh, I get you. This here was a marauder ship. Meaning there's probably a load of treasure here. Damn straight. We'll tell the old mayor the town could use some of their energy surplus or their navigational computer or something, but the most precious cargo we'll keep for ourselves. Damn, you're a shrewd one. No wonder you're sheriff. But what do we do about the hunter that went on ahead of us? That's pretty obvious. We'll kill him, said the other man, Yan. But he didn't know what Dee was capable of. All he knew about how Dee had killed the two deputies. Not having seen it with his own eyes meant he found the account impossible to believe. Lucky for us, the bastard's all caught up in searching the ship. It's a perfect chance to blindside him. What the hell, we can always say some automated defenses got him. That's real good thinking, the sheriff responded, but his words sounded hollow. He knew, as only someone who'd had the tip of Dee's blade pressed against their throat could, what a Dhampir was capable of. But don't lay a hand on him, you follow me? We'll just take whatever we want. I know how tough he is. You lump him in with normal hunters, and you'll be in for a world of hurt. Yeah, but... Yan began. We'll come up with some way to get rid of him later. You savvy? No matter what happens, you don't lay a hand on him, the sheriff said sternly, adjusting his grip on the rocket launcher. Parting company with Pete and Yan, the sheriff walked into the residential sector. Unconsciously, he sought a sound or anything else that would show them some sign of life. Anything would do. Some hint of murderous intent rising from malicious thugs in hiding. The snarls of vicious beasts just waiting to cross the gangways with their masters and sink their fangs into the windpipes of helpless victims. The sound of a safety being disengaged on an automatic crossbow. Anything at all. But there was nothing except the howling of the wind. There was no sign of anyone on the roads, where the artificial sand had blown away, leaving the underlying dirt exposed. There were just lines of dead trees down either side of the street, their branches rattling dryly. Dust catching in his throat, the sheriff pressed a handkerchief to his mouth. His cough created an unsettling echo in the otherwise still air. The sheriff shuddered. The sky was blue. His own shadow stretched long and wide across the ground, and yet the giant was nearly paralyzed with fear. Here was a town. It had buildings. It shot missiles. It pulled alongside them, then laid gangways for boarding. And yet, there wasn't a single crewman. How terrifying was that? As Hudden was about to set off to look for the home of the local mayor, or, rather, the commander of this pirate ship, the tip of his boot struck something hard. When his eyes casually dropped to the ground, they ended up bulging from their sockets. It was a single bare bone.
most likely to be in there for quite some time, as it was dried out and had a thin brown patina to it. It was clearly a femur. Seeing the severed end of it, the sheriff's eyes went wider still. It was burnt. There were signs of carbonization. As he rubbed it with his finger, some of it fell away as powder. This hadn't been charred little by little at a low temperature, as would happen in a fire. It had been exposed to a blast of ultra-high heat, probably a laser. For the first time, the sheriff noticed the white things haphazardly scattered about the place. There was a skull, and a ribcage, and another denuded skull resting on a pile of rags. As his eyes squarely met the skull's empty sockets, cold sweat started soaking his broad back. Stirring his mind to keep it from freezing solid with fear, the sheriff headed over to a shack that appeared to be a bar, and the intact skeleton lying in front of it. The steel arrow jutting from its forehead was a vivid testament to the tragedy that had unfolded here. One of the skeleton's arms was outstretched, and tight in its bony grip was a gleaming black automatic handgun of vintage design. Prying the weapon from its fingers, he examined it. All the ammo had been expended, most likely the result of a long, deadly conflict. But what in the world could have caused the roughneck crew of a pirate ship to start killing each other? Sensing something behind him, the sheriff turned his gigantic form with lightning speed. Standing stock still in the face of the 7 barrels of his missile launcher were Dr. Tsurugi and Lori. "That's just you two," he sighed. Wiping the sweat from his brow, the sheriff lowered his weapon. "What in blazes is going on with this ship? What happened here?" Even the voice of the hot-blooded physician trembled a bit. Looking around at their ominous surroundings, and the remains at their feet, Lori seemed anxious, too. However, unlike the physician or the sheriff, she was completely detached from the whole world of sound, and this actually served to mitigate the terror for her to some degree. She and Dr. Tsurugi each carried a shotgun. "Just what you see. Looks to me like they just went off on a damn killing spree. From the shape of these bones, I'd wager it was quite some time ago. And it looks to me like not one of them made it out alive. Well, they launched missiles at us, and put down gangways. Is that the sort of thing a crewless ship does automatically? For starters, we don't even know why they fired the missiles. They might have been small scale, but they were still nukes. If they had scored a hit, they'd have most likely knocked the town out of the sky with one shot. So, failing to shoot us down, they decided to close with us." The sheriff spat. He looked at the skeletal faces, and, an instant after relief swept over him, the urge to plunder filled his head. The presence of the doctor and Lori quickly became a hindrance to his plan. They'll get theirs, too, the lawman thought, a kind of madness suddenly at work in his mind. The barrel of the rocket launcher rose smoothly. And that was when it happened. Screams echoed off in the distance. 2 of them, Jan's and Pete's. Exchanging glances, the physician and sheriff started running as fast as they could toward the sound. The sheriff halted in front of the control center, where the iron door had fallen into the room. There was a blue tinge to the air, and the foul smell of burnt flesh hit his nose. Smoke was creeping out through the doorway. Someone was in there. Don't tell me they went after Dee, he thought. Apparently realizing his duty as a lawman, the sheriff told Dr. Tsurugi, "You too, stay right here." And then he slipped through the doorway alone. It didn't take long at all. At some point, someone or something had utterly destroyed the control room, and on the floor lay a pair of charred corpses, one on top of the other. He didn't even have to look at them to know they were Pete and Jan's remains. An optical weapon with less output than a laser had burnt them to a crisp. Most likely, it was a heat ray. Shifting the rocket launcher to his left hand, the sheriff drew a huge, explosive firing handgun with his right. While its design closely resembled that of an old-fashioned revolver, it could hold 36 shots. The exploding rounds were powerful enough to drop a lesser dragon with one shot, or dispatch a medium-sized fire dragon with half a dozen. He couldn't very well start blasting away with his missiles indoors. Suddenly, a metallic sound reverberated from a pitch-black corner of the room. Looking over his shoulder, the instant Sheriff Hutton's eyes caught a semicircular shape, his handgun roared. The deafening report of a weapon made Dr. Tsurugi tense up. Beyond the doorway, a red glow swelled momentarily, and an incredible shriek rang out. Lori clung to Dr. Tsurugi's arm, trembling. Though he told her to wait, the girl was determined to go with him. Apparently, she could gather from the red light and Dr. Tsurugi's tension that something had happened. Slowly mouthing the words, "Wait here," Dr. Tsurugi pulled his arm free from her grasp. Lori didn't disobey him. In her travels with her parents, she'd learned far too well what resulted when action was precipitated by curiosity or fear. Laying both hands gently on the girl's shoulders, Dr. Tsurugi headed quickly for the doorway. His steps suddenly halted. With a strange sound, a dark figure appeared from the room. The doctor readied his shotgun. The first thing he saw was an arm-like protrusion that called to mind a thermal ray cannon. Following that was the spherical body, and supporting that body from below were caterpillar treads like those of a tank. "Get down!" The physician shouted as he shoved Lori out of the way, a wave of orange sailing right over him. The tremendous heat set the back of his white lab coat ablaze, and flames licked from his hair. Screaming, the physician writhed in pain. Cradling his head, he rolled his back against the ground in an effort to put out the fire. Grabbing him by the scruff of the neck, Lori dove off to the side. The second heat shower narrowly missed the pair, striking the ground near where they lay. Without so much as looking at the physician's back, Lori shouldered the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The blast struck the dome-shaped torso, and the buckshot ricocheted off in all directions with a beautiful sound. Lori threw herself to the ground. There was no way to escape now. The arm that was going to spray them with white-hot death, however, turned in the opposite direction along with the rest of its body. In the shadow of a building some 15 feet away, there suddenly stood a figure in black, so beautiful and tragic, it numbed even the electronic brain of this machine.
Perhaps that was the reason why it was delayed a tenth of a second, aligning the sights of its thermal ray cannon. Easily leaping over the shower of blistering heat his foe unleashed, D brought his longsword down, slicing the top of the machine's head into a half-moon shape. Chapter 5. End.